The Collapse video series is for entertainment purposes only. Do not commit acts of violence. The large gangs of untrained marauders have been eliminated, but there are still small gangs. In groups of 3 to 5, they are able to evade detection. The marauders who are still alive at this point are not nearly as sloppy as the large gangs were. A few former military and former law enforcement were happy to set aside any moral values they may have once had. The skilled, small groups of marauders are few in number, but they are very good at what they do. They observe potential targets for days to determine which targets are the most vulnerable. They look for weaknesses in the patrols of rural areas. They come through the woods, not the roads, and attack at night under cover of darkness. With rare exception, they do not terrorize for pleasure. That takes too long. They come in, kill whomever they need to kill, take what they can carry, and depart. If they are lucky enough to find a family or individual that is not part of a town, they may remain in that cabin for a long time if it's stocked. Those who have not found a stocked cabin learn of the winter exodus from the north. The people heading south on foot or bicycle usually have provisions with them. Those targets are too hard to resist. They follow the travelers at a distance and pick them off one by one when they straggle too far from the groups they've joined. In small towns, there has been a resurgence in Christianity. People are looking for meaning, hope, and community. They have been constantly faced with their own mortality, something that often causes people to evaluate their relationship with God. They are also struggling with their morality as starving outsiders at the outskirts of town are turned away, left to die, so the townspeople have enough. In the battles with gangs, many have killed for the first time. Even slaughtering an animal for dinner is emotionally and morally challenging for some. They lived their lives up until the collapse, sheltered from the cruelty of survival. Now they are faced with what they must do and what may happen to them. The church has been critical in helping the people through these painful life or death decisions and actions. A side effect of the resurgence in Christianity has been the strengthening of marital bonds and a diminishment in promiscuity for both genders. There is still sex outside of marriage, but casual sex has ceased. The war between Russia and Ukraine is not over, but Russia is winning. With the US out of the picture and Europe occupied with the difficult task of maintaining stability, Russia has been able to use its full force on Ukraine without any holding back. Battles across Ukraine will continue, and an insurgency in some form may be impossible to stop in the near term, but Russian troops march into Kiev. It appears that Russia will have access to Ukraine's vast farmland. Despite the casualties, the mood in Russia is jubilant. With food and oil, they will survive the crisis. Life is better in Moscow than in London, New York, or Paris, and they know it. Support for Putin is high. He decides to take full advantage and begins moving troops to the border with Belarus, implying he is preparing to invade. Officials in Belarus see how Europe has become unstable, while Russia has only gotten stronger during the collapse. And they recognize that Belarus's military doesn't stand a chance against Russia. It's better to surrender than to sacrifice the lives of thousands of 18 and 19-year-old Belarusian boys in vain. Officials in Belarus ask Putin if they may join Russia. Putin agrees. He is welcomed into Minsk with open arms. Older Russians are nostalgic for the days when Russia controlled half of Europe. National pride soars. Turkey and its head of state, Erdogan, have been patiently watching events unfold. Seeing that Russia is expanding, Erdogan wants to do so too. With Europe focused on its own survival and the United States out of the picture, Erdogan sees that now is the time to seize Cyprus, the beautiful island nation that has been embroiled in a low-level civil war between ethnic Turks and ethnic Greeks for decades. The island is quickly captured. The people of Turkey are heartened by the easy victory and are eager to see Turkey take its place as a world power. Arab nations had been attacking freighters with food headed for Israel. They only needed to attack a few before shipping companies decided there were safer places to sell their goods. There is no shortage of buyers of food in the current post-collapse world. Meanwhile, insurgents within Israel have been committing acts of sabotage against Israeli farms and food warehouses. Israel has been aware of the attacks on freighters, but has had a difficult time pinpointing exactly which country or countries have been responsible for each incident, since there actually weren't that many. Finally, intelligence reports reveal that Egypt was involved in one of the incidents. Israel fires missiles on a small Egyptian town as retaliation, to send a message but limit the conflict. Egypt fires back, but is careful to make the response limited as well. The missiles land on Israeli soil, but intentionally miss any settled area. The Arab nations cease their operation. They succeeded in creating a food shortage. People in Israel are lining up at food banks for what is left. By now, most of the stored food around the world has already been snatched up by the various nations, and Israel's ability to produce its own food has been destroyed by sabotage. The only food available on the global market is what is currently being harvested, and there is tremendous competition for that food. The food crisis in Israel will continue without any type of blockade or sabotage. The situation in India has worsened. The country is badly fractured. Existing tribes and castes have organized into factions warring over food. There are 22 major languages spoken in India and hundreds of other less prevalent languages. Some experts believe that there are literally thousands of languages spoken in India. There are more than 2,000 ethnic groups. While there are 5 major castes, there are thousands of subcastes. Many of these groups don't like each other. In multiple studies regarding racism around the world, India has repeatedly been dubbed the #1 most racist country, with the highest percent of individuals surveyed stating they would feel uncomfortable if a family of a different race moved next door. The government has made efforts over the past several decades to unite the country, including repealing a number of laws institutionalizing the caste system. But despite these efforts, an extremely tribal mentality permeates the consciousness of the general population. This instantly translates into tribal conflict in a crisis as severe as the one now being experienced. The government has lost control. It is every tribe for itself. Maybe diversity is not strength. China is struggling to maintain control. The government stockpiled what it could and should have enough to make it through the winter, but the economy remains in shambles after the global economic collapse. Manufacturing accounted for 40% of China's GDP. The demise of the US and Canadian markets was a massive blow to the Chinese manufacturing industry. To make matters worse, Europe has embarked on an ambitious plan to manufacture what they need within the continent. China will only be able to sell a fraction of the goods they used to sell on the global market. Restructuring the economy to reassign millions of unemployed to new jobs is a task that takes more than 3 months. With so many unemployed, the government is giving away food and fuel rations. China produces enough calories to feed its people and bought up enough stored food on the open market to assure it has enough. But with the economy in disarray, the food must be distributed through central planning. People wait in line to receive their rations, which are meticulously recorded so no one gets more than their fair share. The reporting process the government devises is inefficient, and the government officials in charge actively engage in corruption, often charging money, sex, or other favors for the rations. People who have fallen out of favor with the local politicians don't get enough rations. People are angry that this is happening to them after they've worked so hard for so many years. They direct their anger at the government. Sympathy for existing insurgency groups increases. China and Japan agree to meet to discuss the Strait of Malacca, which Indonesia has seized and is heavily taxing ships to pass through. With the US gone, they are the superpowers of the region. Both nations realize they need a comprehensive agreement for the Pacific. Without one, they may come into armed conflict, something neither country wants. During the secret meeting, they agreed to divide up spheres of influence. China's sphere of influence are the countries China can travel to by land: Mongolia, Korea, Thailand, Burma, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. It will have Taiwan, but not Malaysia. Japan will have the island nations: the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Micronesia, Polynesia, Melanesia, and Hawaii. Australia and New Zealand are left out of the negotiations. The secret agreement is that these nations not be directly conquered, but that Japan will not interfere with military or diplomatic activities in China's sphere of influence, and vice versa. Japan agrees to keep all shipping lanes in the Pacific open and tax-free. It sends ships to the Strait of Malacca. If you would like to see an ad-free version of these videos, go to my BitChute or Brighteon page. Even with the ads, there is not nearly enough revenue to support continued production of the series. Please consider supporting me on Subscribestar or click on the PayPal link in the description.